Just transferring that insulator plate onto the new leaves. These center pins were cut a little on the short side. They didn't allow for this plate. Might have to put a little bit of weld right there to make sure the nut doesn't come back off. That looks good. The distance between the center point and the front eye of the leaf spring, that distance is the short distance. From the center pin to the rear eye is longer, so you've got to make sure the front of the spring is facing the front of the car. So I mentioned in the disassembly video, when I took the rear end out and was looking at things, the depth where the center pin goes into the spring perch is only 3/8 of an inch, and the center pins that came on the new springs are 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to trim those down a little bit. So I have ground down the center pins on the new leaf springs to a height of 3/8 of an inch. And I looked everywhere on the internet and could not find a center pin with a 5/8 diameter on it. So I found these stainless steel bushings online with a 1/2 inch diameter inside and a 5/8 outside. So I'm going to use those to bring the pins out to the correct 5/8 diameter to fit in the 5/8 hole that are in the spring perch. On the new insulators, this hole right here, it's got to fit over this little flanged area on the perch, spring perch, and the hole's too small. So I took a utility knife and I just wallered this out just a little bit so that the insulator fits tight right here. So the leaf spring pack and the shock absorber plate and the insulators all get sandwiched to the bottom side of the rear end at the spring perch. So it's going to be easier to roll the rear end over and install the springs with the rear end upside down. Before you put the leaf springs on, you got to put the bumpers back on, because this side of the bumper, the U-bolt goes over this side of the bumper. And I'm going to put a little bit of sealer on the threads here. Now I'll spin it over. Alright, now I'll take the insulator that I beveled out the back of the hole to open it up to get it to fit around this flange right here to make sure it's seated down tight. Alright, and now I've got the leaf spring with the bushing on the center pin centered up. Make sure the short end of the spring is going towards the front of the car. insulator. And then the shock absorber mounting plate configured correctly with the shock mounting hole forward. And then finally the U-bolts. Just torquing them down evenly for now. Good possibility I'll have to loosen them up when I'm trying to line the eyes, the spring eyes up in the front mounting bracket. So I'm torquing them down evenly for now, just so I can manipulate the rear end around, because I've got to flip it over and I'm by myself, so I don't want anything to move while I'm moving it around. Ooh, yeah. So I measured in between the eyes of the leaves. I got about 41 7/8. I could go under the car and it's not that wide, so I'm definitely going to have to loosen the leaf springs up to manipulate them into the brackets. Okay, so I'm going to dry fit the new shackle bolt in the front mounting bracket on the frame. Just take a look at it. You can see this knurled surface right here. When you tighten the nut down on the other side of the frame, this knurled surface right here gets pulled into the bracket, and that this surface keeps the bolt from spinning when you're trying to torque it down. I got about 1/8 of an inch, maybe 3/16 of an inch of bolt showing before the shoulder. When I tighten the nut down on the other side, this shoulder right here will be pulled into the frame and touch the bracket right here, and that will leave me about 1/8 of an inch of this knurled surface right here showing. So that's what I want to look for, this 1/8 of an inch of knurled surface showing. And also, once this shoulder hits the frame, I'll be able to torque that nut down. And here is the old shackle bolt. It's a little bit different. You can't see any knurled surface here, but it looks the same. It's a light press fit in which happens when you tighten the nut down. And I also, just for kicks, measured it to make sure, and I am 1 5/8, and the new one is also 1 5/8. And you'll see that if you put both bushings in, you've only got about 2 9/16 width on that bracket right there. And if you put both bushings in the eye and try to push it into that bracket, you'll see that it's too wide. It won't go in. Same thing to the other side. Just going to put the outer bushing in first. That's why you got this big hole on the other side of the mounting bracket, so you can slide the bushing in. You center up the eye with a centering tool or a punch or a drift, and then you push the bushing in, then you push the shackle bolt in. When you tighten the shackle bolt in, it squeezes the bushing together. So that right there is the position I want to be in. I've got the eye hooked just inside the bracket, and I've got the outer bushing in place. And if it can stay there while I try to get the other side into that position, I'll be in pretty good shape. Really need 2 people for this. Okay, so I got the driver's side in, and I got that screwdriver centered in the bushing, holding it into place. And the passenger side's this close. Just got to roll the jack forward, and should be in place. Slide the inner bushing in. Get it centered. So to put the nut on the shackle bolt, you got to go in that hole through the frame rail, and on the inside of the frame rail right there, it's boxed. So if you drop the nut, it's in a part of the frame that's hard to access. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of hot glue in this socket to hold the nut. My neighbor's going to cut the grass. So you can hear the shackle bolt bottom out when it hits the frame. And just put a little bit of rearward pressure on it. I could eyeball it from the outside. You have to be somewhat of a contortionist. Okay, so the nuts are on the shackle bolts, both sides, and they're not tightened down. Not tightened and torqued completely. You do that after you lower the car and put the weight on the springs. So the next step will be the rear shackles. Get them in place and bolted up. These new shackles seem to be a lot heavier duty than these original. Okay, the key here obviously is to get your eye lined up nice and square, and this top bushing, the inner bushing, needs to be in there first. And before anything's tightened down to spec, got to let the car down and put the weight of the car on it so that the springs are in the ride position. So here on the rear brakes, on the backing plate, you can see where there's pretty deep grooves worn into the friction points where the shoes touch the backing plate. I've already cleaned them out with a little disc sander so I can weld them. The odometer on this car says 53,000 miles, but I would venture to say that this is a very high mileage car, probably at least 253,000, if not more than that. think I'm down to the original pad. That's the original pad right there and right there. So I think I'm okay. Okay, so this video is getting kind of long, so I'm going to end it here. I'll pick up where I left off and begin reassembling the rear brakes and some other odds and ends.